The first thing I saw that morning was a chain stretched across my road. Not a gate. Not one of those orange construction barriers you can move if you really need to get through. I mean an actual steel chain bolted into fresh concrete posts like somebody had decided overnight that I suddenly didn't belong on my own land. I just sat there in my truck for a second staring at it, coffee still in my hand, engine running, trying to process whether I was looking at a mistake or the beginning of a really bad week. Then I noticed the sign hanging from the middle of the chain. Private access, authorized personnel only. That's when I realized somebody had done this on purpose. Now, if you've never lived out in rural Tennessee, there's something you should understand about roads like that. Folks in the city think a road is just pavement and lines painted on asphalt, but out there, a road means history. It means who helped your granddad pour gravel in the July heat back in 1982. It means the route your mother took to get you to school every morning. It means the only ambulance path if somebody drops dead out by the creek. Roads out there matter. And that gravel road. That road had belonged to my family longer than most marriages last. My grandfather, Walter Boone, bought the back parcel in the late 70s from a retired cattle farmer named Earl Dunning. It wasn't much land, just under 3 acres tucked behind a larger stretch of timber property, but Grandpa loved it because it sat quiet against the tree line with enough room for a workshop and a couple trailers. He used to say the place felt like breathing room. After he died, the land passed down to me, and honestly, it became the only thing in my life that still felt stable after my divorce. I kept equipment back there. Small excavators, trailers, welding gear, stuff I rented out to local contractors. Nothing glamorous. Some months were good, some weren't. But it paid the bills and it was mine. That mattered to me more than I realized at the time. The problem started when a development company called Blackthorn Communities bought the surrounding acreage. 14 acres all around me, scooped up from 3 different owners in less than 6 months. Everybody in town knew what was coming before the paperwork even cleared. Cookie-cutter luxury homes for Nashville transplants who wanted country living, as long as there was fiber internet and a Starbucks within 15 minutes. The locals hated it. Not because we were against growth, at least not all of us, but because companies like Blackthorn always showed up acting like the town started existing the day they arrived. They'd hold these little public meetings with catered sandwiches and fake smiles talking about community revitalization, while quietly pricing out the people who'd lived there their whole lives. And the guy running this project, man, his name was Gavin Mercer. Tall guy, expensive boots too clean to have ever touched mud. Permanent grin on his face like he was already halfway through laughing at you before you even opened your mouth. He had this habit of talking slowly to people, especially older folks, like he was explaining taxes to children. I'd met him twice before the fence incident. First time at the gas station where he asked if I'd ever considered selling my parcel. Second time at a county zoning meeting where he acted shocked, genuinely shocked, that I wasn't interested in being part of progress. That second meeting stuck with me because after it ended, an older woman named Ruthie Harper leaned over and whispered, "Honey, men like that don't hear no the first time." Turns out she was right. The morning I found the chain, there were already bulldozers moving dirt up the hill beyond the tree line. Dust everywhere. Backup alarms screaming every 30 seconds. I got out of my truck and walked up to the barrier, and right as I grabbed the chain, I heard somebody behind me say, "Wouldn't do that if I were you." I turned around, and there was Gavin standing beside a white project truck holding one of those giant insulated coffee mugs like he was posing for a real estate magazine. I said, "What the hell is this?" He didn't even look uncomfortable. "Private property now." I laughed because honestly the confidence was unbelievable. "You chained off my access road." "No," he said, taking a sip of coffee. "We secured company property." I remember staring at him thinking, this guy actually believes he can erase me with paperwork. I told him that road was a legal easement tied to my parcel. Been there for decades. Everybody in the county knew it. And I swear to God, he smiled. Not nervous smiling either. That smug kind of smile people wear when they think they've already won. Then he said, "Our attorneys checked. No easement exists." And right there, standing in the dust with excavators rumbling behind him and 20 workers pretending not to watch us, something in my stomach dropped. Because for half a second, I wondered if he might actually be right. Now here's the part I'm not proud of. After Gavin said that, I drove home genuinely rattled. People always imagine these situations like some movie where the hero instantly fires back with a perfect comeback and a stack of legal documents under his arm. But real life usually feels a lot messier than that. I spent most of that afternoon sitting at my kitchen table digging through old folders while my coffee went cold beside me. Property maps, tax records, handwritten notes from my grandfather, receipts older than me, papers stacked everywhere like I was trying to rebuild family history from scraps. And the worst part was, I couldn't immediately find the easement paperwork. That's what started getting into my head. See, my grandfather handled everything himself. The man distrusted banks, computers, lawyers, pretty much anybody wearing a tie. He kept documents in old tackle boxes and rusted filing cabinets out in his workshop. Half the time he labeled things with masking tape and a Sharpie that faded 20 years ago. So while I knew that road was legal, because we'd used it openly my entire life, there was still this creeping fear that somewhere along the way something had been missed. By around 7 that night, I was angry enough to stop thinking clearly. I drove back out there just to look again. The chain was still up. Floodlights from the construction site lit the whole hilltop like a prison yard. And there, parked beside the entrance, sat Gavin's truck. I should have left. Instead, I walked straight onto the site. A couple workers glanced at me, but didn't say anything. Most construction guys know when tension's in the air and prefer not to step into another man's fight. Gavin was standing near a grading map talking to somebody in a hard hat when he spotted me coming. He sighed before I even spoke. "You really need to stop trespassing," I said. "You blocked my road." He handed the clipboard to the other guy and walked over slow, almost amused. "Mr. Boone, I understand this feels personal to you, but legally speaking, your parcel is landlocked." I still remember that phrase because of how casually he said it. Landlocked. Like my grandfather's land had suddenly become some forgotten island overnight. I said, "People have used that road for 40 damn years. And people misunderstand property rights every day." That one hit me harder than it should have. Because it wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was deliberate humiliation. He wanted me to feel small. Wanted everybody standing around to see it too. Then he leaned in slightly and lowered his voice. "Look, off the record, you should probably sell before this gets expensive." There it was. That was the real play. The fence wasn't about safety. It wasn't confusion. He thought pressure would make me panic and unload the property cheap so they could connect their development clean through the center ridge. I asked him straight up, "How much?" He smiled immediately, like he'd been waiting for that question all week. "Blackthorn would probably offer around 60. I almost laughed in his face. The parcel alone was worth twice that with access. He knew it too. I said, "You chain me out, then offer me pennies?" He shrugged. "Market changes." Man, I wanted to hit him so bad in that moment. Not because of the money, but because I realized he thought I was desperate enough to fold. Divorced guy. Small business owner. Working alone half the time. To him, I was just another local he could squeeze until I disappeared. But my grandfather used to tell me something when I was younger. He'd say, "Never rush a man who's cornered." Sometimes that's the first time he finally stops backing up. So instead of swinging on Gavin Mercer in front of half his crew, I went home, and somewhere around midnight, I found it. Not in the filing cabinet. Not in the boxes. In an old leather binder underneath my grandfather's surveying journals. The easement wasn't attached to our parcel number at all. That's why nobody found it. Back in 1974, my grandfather briefly co-owned an adjacent timber lot with Earl Dunning before they split the land years later. The access agreement had been recorded under that original joint deed, buried in county archives under a completely different index reference. But there it was, typed on faded paper, 22 feet wide. Permanent ingress and egress rights. Legally binding. I must have read it 10 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from exhaustion. Then I started laughing. Not loud, crazy laughter. More like the kind that leaks out of you when stress finally breaks. Because suddenly I could picture Gavin sitting in some conference room with overpriced attorneys who never bothered digging past the modern parcel records. They thought they'd checked everything. They hadn't even opened the right door. The next morning I drove straight to Knoxville and met with a real estate attorney named Denise Halpern. Tough woman, probably mid-60s, silver hair, looked at people over reading glasses like she could smell dishonesty from across the room. I handed her the documents, and she spent maybe 30 minutes reviewing them before leaning back in her chair. "Well," she said, "either Blackthorn hired idiots, or somebody hoped you wouldn't fight back." That felt good to hear. Really good. By Wednesday afternoon, Denise had sent formal notice to Blackthorn's legal department along with copies of the easement records. Professional. Cold. No emotion. Just facts. Then she looked at me and said, "Now we make this expensive." I didn't fully understand what she meant until Thursday morning when a county survey crew arrived at the property. See, the easement corridor cut directly through the center of Blackthorn's planned entrance loop. Not beside it. Not near it. Directly through it. And by law, the entire width had to remain accessible. The surveyors started planting bright pink flags every few feet, while bulldozer operators sat there watching like spectators at a tennis match. One of the machine operators actually took his phone out and started recording because even he knew this was turning into a disaster. I stood there with Denise while Gavin stormed across the dirt, practically vibrating with rage. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. Denise didn't even look at him. "Marked legal access. You can't disrupt an active construction zone." She finally turned toward him. "Actually, your company already did that when you obstructed a recorded easement." Man, the look on his face. That confident grin he always wore was gone now. Completely gone. For the first time since I met him, he looked uncertain. And then came the real punch. Because Denise had already filed for an injunction with the county, which meant pending review, construction permits around the disputed access area were temporarily frozen. Everything stopped. Just like that. 40 workers. 3 excavators. Concrete deliveries canceled. Framing crews delayed. Every hour bleeding money. And the whole time those little pink survey flags fluttered in the wind right through the middle of Blackthorn's precious development road like tiny neon reminders that somebody they underestimated had just slammed the brakes on a multi-million-dollar project. That afternoon, I caught one of the workers smirking at me while I drove past the fence. He tipped his hard hat and said, "Hell of a week, huh?" And honestly, it was just getting started. By day 4, the whole county was talking about it. You gotta understand how small towns work. People pretend not to gossip, but the second something dramatic happens, everybody suddenly needs gas at the same convenience store. By Friday morning, folks were slowing down near the construction entrance just to stare at the pink survey flags cutting across the dirt like crime scene tape. Even the local Facebook groups got involved. Half the comments called Blackthorn greedy outsiders. The other half said I was holding back economic growth because I was stubborn and sentimental. And honestly, that part got to me more than I expected. Because deep down, I knew some people weren't completely wrong. The town was changing whether I liked it or not. Kids were moving away because there weren't enough jobs. Old farms were dying off. Property taxes kept climbing. So there were nights during that whole mess where I'd sit on my porch wondering if I was actually protecting something important, or if I was just another bitter guy refusing to let go of the past. But every time I started doubting myself, I'd remember the way Gavin smiled at me behind that chain. That smile answered the question every time. It was never about development. It was about power. Around day 6, Blackthorn's attorneys finally requested a meeting. We met at a conference room downtown. And let me tell you, nothing feels stranger than walking into a polished office building wearing work boots still covered in dried mud, while 3 corporate lawyers stare at you like you tracked dirt across their future profits. Gavin was already there. Didn't smile this time. Didn't even look at me at first. One of the attorneys started talking immediately, using that careful corporate language designed to sound respectful while quietly blaming everybody else in the room. There appears to have been an oversight regarding historical easement indexing. Oversight. That was the word they chose after chaining off my property and trying to pressure me into selling cheap. Denise folded her hands and said, "Your oversight cost my client access to his lawful property and interfered with his business operations." Then another attorney jumped in talking settlement numbers, redesign costs, revised access planning. All this polished legal noise while Gavin sat there stiff as concrete beside them. Finally, he looked at me and said, "This situation escalated further than anyone intended." I actually laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, because hearing him suddenly act reasonable felt insane after the way he'd treated me at that fence. I leaned forward and said, "You told me my land was worthless." His jaw tightened instantly, and for a second nobody spoke. That silence right there. Weirdly enough, that was the moment I realized I'd already won. Not legally, personally. Because people like Gavin go through life assuming money protects them from consequences. They think confidence is the same thing as authority. They push, pressure, manipulate, and most of the time it works because regular people don't have the time or money to fight back. But this time he pushed the wrong person on the wrong piece of land. By the ninth day, Blackthorn folded completely. The chain disappeared first. I noticed it early that morning driving up the road. The concrete posts had been cut clean at the base and hauled away overnight, like somebody wanted evidence erased before sunrise. Fresh gravel had already been spread across the entrance too, probably hoping the whole thing would quietly disappear. Then came the paperwork. Blackthorn agreed to pay my legal fees in full. They signed a permanent recorded acknowledgement of the easement. Not temporary, permanent. County filed and notarized so nobody could overlook it again 20 years from now. And the best part? Their entire entrance design had to be rebuilt around my access corridor. Cost them months, maybe more. A guy I knew who subcontracted grading work told me the delays alone burned through hundreds of thousands before they recovered scheduling. All because somebody got arrogant. A few weeks later, I ran into Gavin one last time at the county clerk's office. Just coincidence. He was walking out while I was heading in. And man, he looked different. Still expensive clothes. Still polished. But tired. Like somebody had finally introduced him to the fact that not everything bends when you lean on it hard enough. We stopped near the courthouse steps for a second. Didn't say much at first. Then he looked at me and asked, "You really would have dragged this all the way through court?" I remember thinking about that question afterward for days because the truth was, I honestly didn't know. Court could have buried me financially. Stress alone nearly did. There were nights I barely slept wondering if one mistake would wipe out everything my grandfather left behind. But standing there looking at him, I realized something. People like Gavin count on that fear. That's the whole strategy. Make fighting feel more painful than surrender. So I told him, probably. He nodded once, almost like he respected the answer even though he hated it. Then before walking away, he said something I still think about sometimes. He said, "You know, if you just talked to us earlier, this could have gone differently." And there it was again, that inability to admit what really happened. Because in his version of the story, chaining off somebody's only road wasn't the problem. The problem was that I resisted it. That's the part that sticks with me even now. Not the legal fight. Not the money. Not even the victory. It's how easy it is for people with enough resources to convince themselves they're entitled to whatever stands in the way of their plans. A road. A home. A family business. Doesn't matter. If you become inconvenient enough, suddenly you're treated like an obstacle instead of a person. The development eventually got finished, by the way. Big houses up on the ridge now. White fences. Decorative lanterns. Tiny trees planted too close together. Sometimes I drive past it and wonder how many people living there have absolutely no idea their neighborhood entrance had to curve awkwardly around a stubborn little 22-foot strip of gravel because one old land record refused to disappear. And my road? Still there. Same gravel crunch under the tires. Same tree line. Same bend near the creek. Every now and then I catch myself smiling when I drive through it. Not because I beat anybody, but because for once, somebody tried to erase a piece of history and failed. But I'll ask you this. If you were in my position, would you have fought the same way? Or would you have taken the money and walked away before things got ugly? Because judging by the arguments people still have about this story around town, not everybody thinks I made the right choice.